Hello, welcome to week 9. This week I am just doing the PowerPoint without my face. So hopefully I put enough pictures in there to keep your interest. We are this week going to launch into the preschool assignment, so that is available for you in this week's module. And there is a discussion open for you to ask questions. So please review that assignment carefully, review the observation guidelines, and let me know what questions you have. We're going to start this week by talking about cognition and language development in preschool years. So I want to talk about 3 different cognition theories. The first one is Piaget, and he talked about how children develop their thinking and how they process information to make logical analysis of different things. So between the ages of 2 to 6 years old, Piaget said this was the stage of pre-operational intelligence. He suggested that thinking occurred in symbols, so children used symbolic thought to represent what they were learning to understand about their world. The purpose was that reason processing was not yet used. They didn't have frontal lobes. They didn't have the ability to really process out and think things through sequentially in the same way. And so they would use symbols or linear thinking. It included language, imagination, animism. Animism, where an animal must think and feel like a human being. And so he talked about the use of language and imagination as a part of this stage. He said there were 4 limitations to operational thought that made logic very difficult until after the age of 6. One was centration, that children would center on one aspect of something. So how long the quarters were in a line in this picture, or how tall the liquid was in a particular glass. They would center on one property and not a second or third property as well. They focused on the appearance of objects, which made it difficult for them to be logical in their reasoning and think about how it might appear to somebody else. They were very static in their reasoning in this age group, he said. And so they were less flexible in being able to think about things differently. And they weren't able to reverse. So if they saw somebody do an action, they couldn't, in their brain, imagine it going backwards to what it was before they did that action. So these 4 issues with pre-operational thought were what the items that he believed made logic difficult for preschool children. All 4 characteristics of pre-operational thought are evident in classic conservation task errors. And we'll talk about those tasks. There's actually an assignment in your discussion to do one of those tasks with the child and talk about what happens when you do that. Young children fail to understand conservation of liquids because they center on what they see, the appearance, noticing only the immediate static condition, not what had changed from moment 1 to moment 2. It does not occur to them that they could reverse the process and recreate the liquid's level of a moment earlier, irreversibility. So we'll look at that in just a minute. Here are the different tasks that he used to test children's pre-operational thought and their ability to reason out answers. So in the liquid version of the conservation task, he put liquid in 2 equal shaped and sized cups and asked the children if they were 2 equal amounts of lemonade or whatever liquid is in there. Then he took one of the cups and poured it into a tall, narrow cup. So it was the same amount of liquid, but in a different shaped cup, and asked them which one had more. And the children consistently pointed to the taller cup. He did this with variations of pop beads or coins, with pencils that were on a different line, with Play-Doh or cookie dough. And so there's a variety of these conservation tasks. There's a video in the module that shows you all of these. There were limitations to Piaget's research. The Piagetian conservation tasks requires words. And so depending on what words were used, children might respond differently. It resulted in better performance of younger children if people used simpler words, were more playful in the act. Piaget underestimated cognition during early childhood, in part because he was using very academic language and underestimated children's abilities. Vygotsky's the second theorist we're looking at this week, and you'll read about him in your text. He developed the social learning theory. He said every aspect of children's cognitive development is embedded in the social context and shaped by other people. He said they were apprentices in thinking, someone whose intellectual growth is stimulated and directed by older, more skilled members of society. He said that children had mentors. Mentors presented challenges, they offered assistance without taking over, and they added crucial information that children needed to solve problems. And they encouraged and motivated children. So a mentor could be an older child, or a mentor could be a teacher, or a parent, or a sibling. He came up with two key terms that we use today when we're thinking about working with young children. One is scaffolding, the process by which people learn from others who guide their experiences and explorations. Scaffolding can take the part of modeling or giving advice or support. He said that the best scaffolding happened within a child's zone of proximal development, or ZPD. Within the zone are the skills that a person can exercise only with the assistance of others, but not yet on their own. So there's the knowledge the child has already that they can do independently. The knowledge within their zone they can do with a master, a mentor, someone who is able to mentor and scaffold their learning. And then there's the knowledge that's outside of that zone of proximal development that they're not ready to learn. In social learning theory, he said there were a couple of things that were common. The first was over-imitation. It was the tendency of children to copy an action that is not a relevant part of the behavior to be learned. Over-imitation might be an exaggerated voice when somebody answers the phone because they're over-imitating the tone of voice their parent uses when they answer the phone. It was very common among 2 to 6-year-olds when they imitate an adult action that are irrelevant and inefficient. Socially motivated and universal, which means it's happening across the world in different cultures, different families. Children over-imitate. They're still trying to figure out which actions, which words, which tones are important to the message that's being given. And so the over-imitation is a piece of that. Language is a really important tool for understanding cognition. The third theory that isn't in the PowerPoint but is in your book is information processing theory, and it equates the idea that our brains are like computers. We take data in and then we put data out after we've organized and processed it. In reality, language is the way that we process the information that we see in the world. It's part of our learning in all cognition: science, technology, engineering, math, creativity. The words are the mediator between the brain's potential and the comprehension of what the child is doing. Language advances thinking. Piaget and Vygotsky talked about how children learn. Vygotsky particularly focused on children's private speech, or their internal dialogue, and that it provided social mediation during learning. Private speech at first in young children is outward speech. Children will talk to themselves out loud in a way to comprehend a task. And later that's turned into internal thought, was his theory. STEM learning, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, have been encouraging children for a while now to get engaged in STEM activities. And a lot of that comprehension of how children create new ideas and build new things comes from language and problem solving as they're engaging in different tasks. So he said language was a tool. It was the underpinning of math and physics development during the preschool years. That language helped children to understand one-to-one correspondence, to remember time and dates, to understand the sequence of events, like what happens during the day, what comes first, second, and what happens after nap. Knowing what numbers are higher than others, understanding how to make things move, and appreciating temperature effect. Language plays a key role in all of those. Vygotsky also said that the executive function, and we've seen this with brain research as well, The executive function is the cognitive ability to organize and prioritize many different thoughts in order to make decisions. In preschool children, this executive function is not as well developed as it is later in life. The executive function arises from various parts of the brain coming together to get as much information as possible. It allows a person to anticipate, strategize, and plan their behavior. Our executive function on our frontal lobe isn't fully developed until we're 25 or close to 30. And that is in large part because the brain is still growing during that time. And so children are developing some of those early executive function skills during preschool years. Some of the components of executive function are working memory, which is remembering what the task is that we're supposed to be doing while we're doing it. If I gave you a series of steps to take in order to solve a math problem, you would need to remember all of those steps each time you solved the problem. If the working memory is compromised, somebody might forget what those steps were after they did 2 or 3 problems. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to think about something differently than the way you've thought about it before. For example, with the mountain experiment that Piaget did, a child would look at the mountain and see it only from their perspective because they don't have the cognitive flexibility to picture it from another perspective. And inhibitory control, which means stopping impulses enough to think through and strategize and anticipate and plan rather than just react. One of the other components of Vygotsky's theory is theory. It is the idea that children attempt to explain everything they see and hear all the time. These theories don't appear randomly. Children develop these theories about intentions before they employ their impressive ability to imitate. So they're watching, exploring, creating theories about what actions and words mean, and then acting them out to see if they got it right, if their theory is correct. Theory of mind is folk psychology. It involves the person's theory of what other people might be thinking. It's slow to develop, but typically beginning in most children at around the age of 4. It can be seen when young children try to escape punishment by lying. If I say something different, does that become true? Do you believe it because I said it? And so it's an experimentation with this idea. So candy's in the crayon box. Anyone would expect crayons in a crayon box, but once a child sees that candy is inside, he expects that everyone else will also know that candies are inside, whether they were in the room when the candies were revealed or not. That's an example of this theory of mind. If I know it, somebody else must know it. Brain and context, what strengthens the theory of mind in young children. A child's ability to develop theories correlates with the maturity of the prefrontal cortex and with advances in executive processing. Practice, experience, and maturation are relevant. Context and culture matter. So this cartoon shows you an example of theory of mind. The dad's at work and he's calling and saying, "What are you doing, Denzel?" And Denzel says, "I'm playing with this," because he imagines that his father can see the train in his hand. Between the ages of 3 and 12, children become better liars. Between the ages of 4 and 5, that prefrontal cortex maturation contributes to the advances in theory of mind and executive control. But executive control, remember, isn't fully online, and so children will experiment with lying up until around the age of 12 or later, depending on how it's dealt with. Social interactions with peers promote brain development. So the more people interact, the more they're sharing their thoughts, the more the brain of each person is developing. Language is pivotal to every kind of cognition in early childhood. Early childhood is a sensitive period, our best time to master vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. The average child knows about 100 to 2,000 words at age 2 and more than 5,000 to 30,000 at age 6. The difference depends on how much language the child is exposed to. The more language the child is exposed to, the more language they will have. So let's take a closer look at vocabulary, sentence length, grammar, questions in these 4 years while children are going through preschool. There's a vocabulary explosion. Vocabulary builds quickly and comprehension is greater than production. That means children can understand more of what they hear than what they're able to say. Verbs, adjectives, adverbs, conjunctions, and many nouns are mastered during this time. Fast mapping is the speedy and sometimes imprecise way in which children learn new words by tentatively placing them in mental categories according to their perceived meaning. Fast mapping leads to errors, but it's one of the ways children are very quickly trying to process and understand language. Words have logical extensions. For example, if you want to make something plural, you put an S at the end of it, except we don't say that one deer becomes two deers. And so those logical extensions could lead to some of these errors from that fast mapping. It's closely related to fast mapping because children are quickly trying to comprehend the rules of a language. It occurs when children use words to describe other objects in the same category. Bilingual children often use code switching, where they're switching from one language to another language. One of the great benefits of bilingual education for children under the age of 5 is their brain is able to comprehend two different languages, and it teaches flexibility of thinking and the ability to code switch. So language learning, grammar of language, structures, techniques, and rules that communicate meaning are different in different languages. Word order and word repetition, prefixes and suffixes, intonation and emphasis changes depending on the particular family a child's being raised in, the culture they're in, and children are observing for all of this so that they can develop their language. Overregulation is the application of rules of grammar even when exceptions occur. So the example of deers was an example of overregularization. It makes language seem more regular than it actually is. We have a lot of variations within language that don't follow the rules. Pragmatics is the practical use of language that includes the ability to adjust language communication according to audience and context. Pragmatics is the way we speak to our friends differently than we would speak to our boss. We speak to our boss differently than we would to our life partner. And so all of those are pragmatics, the way we change our language usage in different settings. Learning to language minority people who are not speaking English in the United States are often disadvantaged if they don't speak the majority language. In the United States, that's English. Often that's because of the way the schools are teaching the language. They're not fully embracing both languages and speaking them fluently. When we don't speak a language fluently, children can get confused about the pragmatics or the grammar or the structure of the language. Sometimes that can lead to lower school achievement, lower self-esteem, and lower employment opportunities. Again, the best language learning period is in early childhood. Bilingual brain may facilitate some resistance to neurocognitive disorders because it does teach that brain flexibility. But to develop a fully bilingual brain, children need to have exposure to both languages in their full comprehension, not in a mixed way. And so they need to understand those languages where each language is spoken clearly and distinctly within their own structures and rules. There are language shifts. Children become more fluent in the school language than in their home language. So we can often isolate a child from their family if we only speak one language at school and it's not the same language as what they learn at home. Balanced bilingual means a child is fluent in two languages, not favoring one or the other, and the greatest brain flexibility and the greatest strength and academic achievement comes from when a child is balanced bilingual. It occurs if the adults talk frequently, listen carefully, and value both languages. Each language should be used distinctively on its own without mixing it with the other language. And that has the best benefit for children when there's balanced bilingual support. Strategies and experiences to support literacy learning, code-focused teaching, where we're really helping children decipher language. Lots and lots of books. My kindergarten teaching mother would say they need 1,000 books read to them before kindergarten. Children become enchanted with books when we're enchanted with books. Parent education to support language development at home. language enhancement, where we're extending children's language, adding in adjectives or adverbs to extend what they've shared with us, and preschool programs where language is generally more widely used than at home. So thank you. I know the video is a little bit short and there is only one lecture video this week because there are other videos in the module that I want you to watch before you answer the discussion questions. Again, please make sure to read the assignment for the preschool observation and ask any questions you have in the assignment questions discussion. Thank you so much.